Charlie Munger didn't invest using spreadsheets alone. He used a hidden mental filter that most Wall Street analysts are entirely blind to. While everyone else was chasing hypergrowth and frantic disruption, Munger quietly studied a bizarre class of businesses that actually seemed to defy the laws of corporate physics. Companies that did not slow down as they expanded, but somehow became heavier, denser, and infinitely more dominant the larger they grew. How is that even possible? If you look at standard business economics, growth is supposed to get harder over time. Markets saturate, competition catches up, and margins compress. Yet Munger identified a rare genetic code in business where every new customer added doesn't dilute the system, it reinforces the wall. What was his secret lens? What mental model allowed him to spot these compounding fortresses while everyone else was distracted by short-term noise? The answer is buried inside a concept he called the multidisciplinary latticework. And once you see how it works, you will realize why most companies are accidentally building glass houses while a select few are constructing medieval castles. To understand how Charlie Munger looked at the corporate world, you have to abandon the narrow confines of traditional finance. Munger believed that relying on a single academic discipline to understand a business is like trying to build a house with only a hammer. You see every problem as a nail. Instead, he mapped human psychology, biological ecosystems, engineering principles, and microeconomics into a single, interconnected framework. When applied to business growth, this latticework reveals a stunning realization. True economic power is not born out of aggression. It is born out of invisible geometry. Imagine a spiderweb floating in the morning dew. If you touch a single outer thread, the entire structure absorbs the vibration, tightening around the point of contact rather than breaking. Every strand supports every other strand. Munger looked at exceptional enterprises through this exact architectural mindset. Most ordinary companies grow like loose piles of sand, tall, imposing at first glance, but utterly vulnerable to the first strong wind or a shifting market climate. If you remove one grain of support, the whole slope collapses. The businesses Munger admired were structurally locked together. They possessed a multi-layered ecosystem where every transaction, every customer habit, and every operational process locked the participants deeper into the core. Think about the psychological relief of absolute certainty. Human beings are hardwired to avoid pain and cognitive overload. We hate making complex decisions when simple, reliable ones are available. When a business figures out how to remove the friction of choice from a customer's daily life, something extraordinary happens. The customer stops looking at alternatives. The search cost drops permanently to zero. And silently, without a single aggressive marketing campaign, the business achieves the holy grail of capitalism, pricing power backed by habit. Yet Wall Street analysts often misread this phenomenon completely. They look at a high-margin company and scream that prices are too high, predicting that a cheaper competitor will swoop in and steal the market share. They evaluate the business through the flat lens of basic math. Munger would chuckle at that mistake. He knew that human beings do not make economic decisions based on spreadsheets. They make them based on trust, comfort, and the deep-seated dread of operational failure. Until you understand the invisible tax that human laziness imposes on your competitors, you will never spot a true monopoly. Think about what happens when an enterprise scales up under this model. In a traditional business, scale brings bureaucracy, sluggish communication, and bloated overhead. Management loses touch, efficiency drops, and the company becomes a lumbering giant ripe for disruption by a nimble startup. That is the standard life cycle of commerce. Rise, peak, bloat, and fall. But Munger spent decades analyzing the exceptions, the rare entities that completely broke that cycle. Why did they get stronger as they grew larger? Because their scale was not just operational, it was psychological and distribution-based. Imagine a massive logistics network or a deeply embedded software pipeline. The more users that join the platform, the more valuable the network becomes for every single participant already inside it. This is not just a benefit, it is an invisible gravitational pull. Every new supplier wants to go where the customers are, and every customer wants to go where the widest selection and maximum reliability live. It creates a self-feeding loop that requires zero artificial stimulation. The engine runs on its own momentum, and here is where the plot thickens. because maintaining that kind of gravity requires a level of institutional discipline that destroys most CEOs. Why do brilliant companies eventually rot from the inside out? It is rarely because of external competition. It is almost always because of internal incentives. Munger was obsessed with human psychology and incentive structures, famously stating that if you want to predict human behavior, you must look at what people are rewarded for. When corporate leaders are paid to chase quarterly earnings, maximize short-term stock pops, or engineer flashy mergers, their minds warp. They start sacrificing long-term durability for immediate applause. They cut corners on quality, raise prices exploitatively to pad a single balance sheet, or acquire unrelated businesses they do not understand. They try to be everything to everyone. And in doing so, they crack the foundation of their own fortress. Munger looked for the exact opposite profile, leaders who possessed a ruthless, almost boring dedication to consistency. He looked for management teams who treated their capital like a precious, finite resource, deploying it only when the odds were overwhelmingly in their favor. They were not interested in looking smart every single day. They were interested in being undeniably right over a 30-year horizon. This brings us to a profound paradox that trips up almost every ordinary investor. We live in a culture that worships action. If you are not pivoting, launching a new feature, or expanding into a new territory every 6 months, the market assumes you are dying. Speed is treated as a moral virtue. Yet Munger's mental models taught a radically counterintuitive lesson. The most powerful businesses are often the ones that change the least. They find a timeless human need, build an airtight system around satisfying it, and then spend decades doing the exact same thing with obsessive, compounding precision. They do not get distracted by shiny new technological fads that promise the world but leave no permanent economic residue. They let time do the heavy lifting. Think of it like planting an oak tree versus buying plastic flowers. Plastic flowers look vibrant and colorful immediately, requiring no patience, but they fade, wither away, and eventually end up in a landfill. An oak tree starts painfully slow, hidden beneath the dirt where nobody can see its progress, building a root system so deep and complex that storms only anchor it further into the earth. Decades later, it stands unmovable while everything around it has been swept away. That is the exact difference between a hype-driven company and a Munger-style compounding fortress. How do you spot the roots of an oak tree in the messy financial landscape of today? You stop looking at the headline growth numbers. You stop asking how fast the revenue is climbing and start asking a much more uncomfortable question. What happens to this business if the global economy grinds to a halt for 12 months? Does its customer base stick around because leaving is simply too painful and disruptive? Does its distribution network become more deeply entrenched because smaller players cannot afford to replicate the infrastructure? Does its management team possess the discipline to sit on their hands and wait for high-probability moments rather than forcing mediocre deals? When you run a company through these mental filters, the noise of the stock market fades into the background. You begin to see that true business strength is not about crushing your rivals in a bloody war of attrition. It is about building a structural reality where your competitors' efforts to fight you only exhaust them faster, while your own position silently deepens with every passing year. That was Charlie Munger's ultimate gift to the world of thought, not a formula for getting rich quick, but a multidisciplinary lens for seeing reality as it actually is, stripped of hype, emotion, and temporary illusions. If this deep dive into the mental models of long-term wealth changed the way you view business strategy, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what economic principle you want to deconstruct next.